Welcome to Data Talks. Before I start our episode today, I would like to invite you all who is watching us on YouTube or hearing us in Spotify or in other podcast aggregator that all the episodes are also available in our website, data-talks.uni-münster with UNE.de. During the Data Talks project, we have been talking about the use of technology and availability of data in concrete, although complex situations, such as health, education, corruption fighting, climate change, etc. Then this episode is a bit different. The relationship between science fiction and technology goes beyond imagining what devices will be produced or the design of clothes in the future. Science fiction helps us think also about the moral dilemmas we might face, the fundamental human issues, the relationship between technology, power, and coercion, and the relationship of men among themselves. And to talk about that, we have two special guests with us today. From Brazil, we have received today Dr. Veridiana Domingos Cordeiro. Veridiana is a sociologist and researcher, currently a postdoc research fellow at the C4AI, Center for Artificial Intelligence, supported by IBM, FAPESP, and the University of São Paulo. Veridiana holds a master's degree and a PhD in sociology. And for the past 11 years, she has been developing research on sociology of mind, sociology of memory, digital sociology, sociology of artificial intelligence, sociology of knowledge, and social theory. She's the author of the book I'm going to repeat, sorry. She's the author of the book Sociology in Brazil, a brief institutional and intellectual story, and wrote chapters for many books, including The Risk Perception of Artificial Intelligence, Automata's Inner Movie, Science and Philosophy of Mind, and Palgrave Handbook of Digital Everyday Life, the next one to be published. Veridiana, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jessica. It's a pleasure to talk with you both today. And I've been watching Data Talks, and it's such a nice project. So I am always glad that academia enables us to build these transnational bridges.
Well, thank you. And from Germany, we have today with us Dr. Isabella Herrmann. Isabella is a speaker, writer, and curator in the field of science fiction, which she considers a mirror of our present and a metaphor for the future. Isabella is currently co-director of the Berlin Sci-Fi Film Fest, the first genre-specific sci-fi film festival in Germany. She holds a master's degree and a PhD degree in political science, and in her work, she focuses on how science fiction and visions of technology construct and reflect socio-political structures and world politics. Topics here include artificial intelligence, Anthropocene, climate change, and space travel. Her work experience also includes the scientific coordinator of a research project on AI and human responsibility at the Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Science and the program director of the Present Futures Forum at the Technical University of Berlin. Isabella, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I also think it's quite cool to have this German-Brazilian bridge today.
Well, thank you. I also expect a really interesting conversation, and I would like to start with Veridiana. Veridiana, so I have two questions actually. Do you call yourselves C4AI or C4AI? I was with this question in my mind.
You are completely right. It's C4AI.
C4AI. So okay. So could you explain to us briefly what is the work of C4AI and what are the key areas that you are researching?
Right. C4AI, it's the Center for Artificial Intelligence. It is in Brazil at the University of São Paulo. And it is a partnership between IBM and São Paulo Foundation. So from IBM's side, it is the center is part of the AI Horizons Network, which is a program created in 2016 to promote the collaboration among universities around the world for developing research on AI. And the center was established last year in 2020 as a research center for producing advanced research in AI, for debating and disseminating the topic, for training students, but mainly for transferring this knowledge and technology to society, because University of São Paulo, as the main university of Latin America, has this public commitment as a major value as a public university. And regarding the areas, the center is organized around 5 main areas of research. One is for natural language processing, especially in Portuguese, which is pretty underdeveloped because this is a huge challenge, technically speaking. There is one research strand for reasoning on ocean data based on machine learning. And by ocean data, I mean specifically what we call as Blue Amazonia, this maritime Brazilian territory. There is another front related to agribusiness. So they work on decision-making in food production networks. There is another area in health studies where they work with machine learning for stroke diagnosis and stroke rehabilitation. And the last one, it's AI humanity. It's an area that thinks over the future of work, about diversity and inclusion, AI and society. So there are these completely different 5 areas, because AI is interdisciplinary and affects all the domains of social and natural life. And these areas are gathered together around C4AI. So I think that is a baby-born project, but it has a lot of potentialities, and I think it will be very important for Latin America.
This is very interesting, especially because we are talking about different areas, but they, as you mentioned, they talk with each other. They are the challenges that we are facing. Some challenges are more Brazilian challenges, like agribusiness is really a structure of our economy. So it makes sense that such a center research about this, and it's really interesting. All the groups were created last year in 2020, or they pre-existed before?
Actually, I think that all these research strands were going on inside the university. And the center and IBM and São Paulo Foundation, they came to aggregate the research areas and especially to fund properly these research areas. So now we have like a facility where everybody can join together and have meetings and develop research together. So in 2020, it was the year when they really established formally the center.
Well, thank you very much. I will go now to Isabella. Isabella, you work simultaneously with cinema, more specifically in the theme of science fiction, and also work to contribute on the debate on the relationship on visions of technology and social political structures. What has been a trend in science fiction films in the last years regarding the portrait of technology, and what does it tell about our society?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, for sure, artificial intelligence has been a trend. Because of that, we're making the link now, with the event of today. So we see that, I think it's around 2010, science fiction films featuring artificial intelligence in all its forms, you know, in robots or assistants or artificial general intelligence and conscious systems. Those films are really mushrooming, and this goes hand in hand with the actual development. And it's not only, you know, mainstream films, it's also independent films like in the Berlin Sci-Fi Film Fest. And it's also in literature. We see that too. For example, authors like Ian McEwan, who are not really famous for science fiction, they do write books now on the topic. So his book was Machines Like Me, for example. And this interlinkage between, you know, real technological development and science fiction is, I mean, we have seen that before, for example, with the topic of cloning. In 1994, the sheep Dolly was cloned, and then afterwards, also films and books on the topic were mushrooming. And what I think is quite important is that science fiction, even though it is connected to real tech development, because there is this hype, there is this trend, everyone's talking about it, and it's not really about the technology. I mean, science fiction is like a continuum. So on the one side, it is, of course, connected to the technological hype. And then it can be a kind of critical technology assessment or even foresight. If we think about, you know, digital assistants, for example, or like the communicators in Star Trek, these are all kinds of digital devices. And now, I mean, they're normal in our daily lives. So this would be one side of the science fiction continuum. But then it's also a distorting mirror or a looking glass, or even on the other side, a metaphor for social issues. And this is what makes science fiction so fascinating, because it does kind of happen in, you know, our plausible scientific thinking, but it's not only about technological issues. So if you think about a humanoid robot, for example, it's not really, you know, about building a humanoid robot, but also the robot is kind of a metaphor for marginalized people in a society or people who claim their rights. And then the whole, you know, space for interpretation or thought experiments becomes a lot broader and bigger. And I think this continuum, you know, between real tech development and the metaphorical interpretation of science fiction makes it really fascinating also for social scientists.
It's so funny you mentioned the clone in 1994. I think Meridiana might thought the same thing, that the second most exported Brazilian soap opera is The Clone. It was in 97, around that, and it was the story of a guy being cloned in an experiment, and he dates the partner of the original one. It's really famous. It was a huge thing in Russia also, and other countries. Wherever I travel, I say I'm from Brazil, many people already ask me about this. So there is science fiction soap operas too. But this is really interesting. Sorry to make I need to make this comment because anyway, I'm a big soap opera fan. And it's interesting. It's interesting to say. Would you say that it makes a kind of a parallel with, for example, stories of the Greek mythology, in which we are thinking about human problems, but with a super different, with this goddess, and we are always talking about ourselves then, or would you say that science fiction has a specifically approach that wouldn't be so present in the other literature? Of course, regarding the technology, but I mean, when we are talking about human issues.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, science fiction is a reflection of our social fears and hopes, and also trends, developments. And in fact, it is more about the present or even the past than about the future. I mean, most science fiction is set in the future. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but mostly it is. But not because this is, you know, a real prediction of the future, but because it's a plausibility why this tech development took place. So the future is more step to the side, you know, and not really to the future. And often science fiction is also called the methodology of the future. So it also tackles, you know, this really basic human issues, the human conditions. We are mortal and we need to die, and how could we overcome those issues, which are also topics of Greek mythology. But what I think makes science fiction distinct as a genre is that it really developed in our modern times with the technological progress, and also with these scientific inventions and scientific research. So you always try to base the story in a kind of scientific background. And this is plausible within the story. It doesn't really have to be plausible in the real world. So, for example, a time machine, you know, there are no time machines. But metaphorically, they are, of course. And yeah, so science fiction is truly connected to other forms of narratives or literature or storytelling concerning, you know, that it tackles kind of our basic problems. But yeah, it's also really connected to this technological scientific thought, which also is not only about science as kind of the life sciences or natural or chemistry or physical sciences, but also social sciences.
And regarding, I will make this question to Isabella, we'll come back to Veridiana, but still regarding science fiction films, most of them are placed in a dystopian scenario. Why would be that, or am I only watching the wrong ones?
No, of course, most of it is dystopian. I mean, there are many reasons for that. I mean, first of all, science fiction films, it's culture, it's art, but it's also entertainment. And if you have a dystopian or a negative or conflictuous setting, I mean, coming to artificial intelligence, you know, we have always this kind of war of humans against machines, like in the Matrix. And then you have, I mean, impressive visual effects or CGI or whatever. I mean, science fiction was always a motor for visual effects in cinema. So if we think about 2001: A Space Odyssey or Avatar, or again, Matrix, for example. So this really, you know, makes it kind of dramatic action. So we have this as dystopian features. And there's always, I always quote Susan Sontag here, because in an essay, she said in the 1960s that science fiction is not about science, it's about disaster. And disaster is one of the oldest subjects of art. So again, it's also kind of disaster porn, you know, science fiction. But then also it's really hard or a lot more difficult to tell positive stories. So it could also be, you know, a laziness, because it's really easier to have these negative scenarios than come up with something new. And also it could be kind of an absolution or catharsis then we are again in Greek, not methodology, but Greek theater. That I go, through this very dystopian setting, and then afterwards I might feel better because our reality is not really that bad how it is in, I don't know, The Matrix, for example, again. So these are some reasons, but actually it's no excuse that there are no positive or more, maybe even, utopian or anti-dystopian stories. And I think we need them. And there are approaches, for example, in Solarpunk, which also comes from Brazil initially. But there's still a long road to go to come up with more positive narratives.
Yes, this is a question also in Professor Neri in the book that Viridiana co-wrote, The Risk of Perception of Artificial Intelligence, mentions, for example, that Japanese have a different perception of technology in comparison to the West, broadly speaking, or at least with Hollywoodian productions. And Viridiana, based in your experience as a researcher at Yokohama State University, would you agree with that? How do you think the technology is perceived in these different scenarios?
Well, this is a very interesting question. We discussed this topic in the book in a very explanatory way, so I will do the same here. I think it's a very fun topic. In the book, the discussion regards AI specifically, not technology as a whole. So I think it is important to highlight that, and that we made a comment about the Japanese environment. So not the East, because the East is very diverse. So once you are in Japan, it seems that you are living in a kind of past future, because it is so technological, but it is technological in a 90s sense. It is technological, but it's old. So Japan is very attached to some old habits that we don't have anymore, such as using bills to pay something in a store. I think that over 80% of retail transactions in Japan are still in cash. They send faxes and to send messages. They have a lot of non-digitalized paperwork. So in some areas of social life, I would say that they reject technology in many ways. However, there is a contradiction here because on the other hand, Japan is one of the most advanced countries regarding AI in many areas. So they have this initiative called Society 5.0 that aims to use AI in many areas of social life, healthcare, disaster response, that is an issue here. And the idea of this initiative is to furnish more positive views on AI for Japanese workers and business. So I think that the Japanese policymakers understood that AI may solve a lot of issues of Japan, because they have labor force shortage and the population is plummeting. So in Japan, deaths outnumber births. In some regions in Japan, they have fewer people that they had 7 years ago. And a third of the Japanese population is older than 65 years old. So if you access the Japanese government website, you can read about this Society 5.0 plan. They mentioned this possibility of having a super aging, super smart society. They plan to build a super smart city with a lot of robots and automation. So I think that Japan is the most robot integrated economy in the world. And there are some historical aspects for that. That's what we draw in the book. So we know that Western societies hold a lot of discussions among academics and experts on the risk of AI. And I felt that in the West, there is still a feeling we experienced centuries ago with the Luddism in the Industrial Revolution. So there is a fear of unemployment because of machines. And I don't think it is true within the Japanese environment. Because in Japan, machine intelligence is not only positively depicted in movies, in mangas, in animes, but it is always also depicted by the Japanese academics and experts. So if you are in the streets of Tokyo, for example, you will see a society in symbiosis with machines. Like they have game machines for entertainment, robots helping tourists with directions, especially after the Olympics, food machines of all sorts. So as I said, Japan does not have enough labor force. So they need machines and they like them, especially the ones with these anthropomorphic traits. And in the book, we mentioned that the Japanese society live a truly robophilia, like a love for robots, and not a robophia, like this phobia that we have against robots in the West. And I think that this happens because there is a combination of two aspects. First, the cultural aspects, this symbolism built around the robots over Japanese history. And there is a real economic situation, social economic situation that urges for this kind of robots' help. So we can trace many hypotheses for this Japanese robophilia. We can recall, for example, we can trace back to the 15th century when they use these mechanized small puppets for entertainment. They liked that very much, the so-called Karakuri Ninjo. It's a kind of robot predecessor, I would say that. But after the Second World War, while the West was producing a lot of movies depicting AI as a threat against humanity, Japan was producing animes and mangas representing robots as heroes. So there is an iconic example that I like to mention because it's worldwide famous. Is the manga called in the West is Astro Boy, in Japan is Atomo, and it is a very interesting story. Because the story is a scientist. It is always a scientist. In the West, stories is always there is a scientist creating robots. So there is a scientist who creates a robot to replace a boy, the Minister of Science's son, who died. And this robot, Astro Boy, was very similar to a human, but the minister realized that he does not have the same human abilities, like aesthetically appreciating a flower, like this very human things that we have. Because like a computer, Astro Boy could just recognize geometric shapes and some patterns. He worked like a computer. And because of that, the minister just donates Astro Boy to a circus, but then the circus is on fire one day, and Astro Boy and other robots save a lot of people. And the minister ends up granting civil rights to Astro Boy and to all robots in Japan. So, and Astro Boy is not the only story like that. There are other animes like Tetsujin 28, also written in the 50s or 60s, I'm not right, that portray robots as saviors. let's say, heroes, saviors, I don't know. And these animes, they picture a future where robots and humans like embrace each other in this technology human symbiosis. And I'm sure that this culture is not responsible for the proliferation of robots in Japan, but it helped to create this more positive reception to these creatures. And when the robots became reality in the 80s and in the 90s, I think that the Japanese population was more used to this kind of image. So in the 90s, 80% of the industrial robots in the world were produced in Japan. So they use a lot of that. And still today, Japan is a leader on that topic. So facing this people shortage, robots really became the solution to help Japanese society to continuously grow despite this decreasing birth rate. So they use robots in healthcare areas to substitute people who take care of elderly people or children. They use robots for therapeutic communication, to entertainment, to clean, or to simply interact with. So if you are in Japan, you can see a lot of Pepper. I don't know if you are aware to Pepper. It's a white robot. It's anthropomorphic. It's
the
a
same
social
one
robot
that they have in the United States. I saw already in San Francisco, like it looks like a child robot, actually.
Yeah.
It has a
White
iPad
with
here.
blue eyes.
This one,
Yeah.
I saw this one already.
They
Really
are
cute.
all over Japan. Like, people interact with Pepper, and there are thousands of Peppers across commercial places and houses. So in Japan, automation or robots, it is less about threatening jobs, and it's more about economic survival, because besides the population aging, Japan has a very strict immigration policy. They are very isolationist. They are an island and they isolate themselves. That's the point. It's not like Canada that has this labor shortage and they welcome immigrants. Contrary-wise, Japan just kind of reject immigrant people. And so AI may be a solution for them. And I think that in this context where AI is needed because of lack of human, AI may be a solution, but in contexts where AI is not a necessity or an immediate necessity, I think that it is seen as a potential risk. So it's very hard to conceive this scenario in the US, for example, because they receive tons of immigrants every year. So it's not easy to defend the employment of robots for services or productions. And in Japan, it's easier. They need people, and why not artificial people? And these robots are really deemed as humans sometimes, because if you enter in a Japanese factory, you can find robots pictures as the best employee of the month, which is very funny, right? So actually for us in the West, it's almost creepy. So, well, just to wrap up, Japan is very advanced in AI, and they are very used to use robots in their daily basis. And they are expecting to have until 2030 around 300,000 or 270,000 artificial intelligence experts in the country. And I'm pretty sure that the Japanese population will receive very well some kinds of AI, especially these ones powered by robotic knowledge, and the ones that have this anthropomorphized AI threats?
I think this is interesting because my next question will be to Isabel about the perception of technology in German sci-fi movies. But I'm also thinking about this. There is a shortage of labor force here in Germany too, and especially some really specifically trends like sorry, not trends, Fach, like Pflege. Yeah, thank you. Work for I'm listening these words always in German, so I forgot the words in English. And so I cannot see in an Altenheim, for example, a robot assisting. Am I being wrong, or Isabella, what do you think?
I mean, there is really a lot of development going on and very many research projects from all kinds of universities and institutions, you know, about robots for care, for example. But so as to my knowledge right now, they are not broadly in use, and there is also a lot of ethical discussion around that. And it made me laugh because when Veridiana said about Japan that they still use fax, you know, and have a lot of and paper and stuff, it kind of reminded me on Germany, because we are also, I mean, obviously a high-tech country, primarily when it comes to robots and industrial robots. But on the other hand, I think still a lot of people pay with cash. I mean, here in Berlin, there are cafes who won't even accept a credit card. I mean, you need to pay cash. So I think this is really an interesting ambivalence to be, you know, a high-tech country on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you're not so technology prone or technologically savvy. And in Germany, we have, I mean, we are not so robophilic, obviously not. And there is also this German angst around, you know, that, so maybe it is also a cliche, but cliches have always a bit of truth in them. So we tend to be very skeptical about all kinds of things. But you ask for science fiction films, and this actually should be reflected there as well, right? And I don't see it in German science fiction films that they are particularly dystopian or negative. I mean, first of all, there are not so many German science fiction films. This has only changed regarding AI in the last 2 years. So now we have a lot of films in that area. I think, I mean, for German, you know, measures, this is a lot, kind of 8 or 9. And they are very broad. So maybe, you know, this is also kind of some film recommendations. Ich bin dein Mensch, or I think maybe the English translation might something be I am your human being, which is our contribution to the Academy Awards, which is about a humanoid robot, and this is not dystopian. So it's actually quite positive. Or we have, it's called a docu fiction, The Last Invention, which is about an artificial general intelligence, very cliche, very dystopian. And we have Exit, which is about, you know, digital clones or digital twins, also kind of dystopian. There was a recent film, Das Haus, The Home, which is about an AI-controlled home. And another one, which is called Hyperland, about platforms, which has a very utopian positive twist in the end. So maybe, you know, you would like to watch some of these films, but what I want to say also, the broad range, you know, from robots to very almighty powerful systems, to platforms, to Internet of Things, AI controlled homes. And yeah, I think you see that the whole topic really hit Germany in its popular culture right now. And in that sense, I cannot really see that we are more dystopian or more negative than all the others.
No, I was not even thinking necessarily dystopian or negative. I was thinking, but actually the first movie that I thought it was Metropolis, because one of the Metropolis is considered, from Fritz Lang, it's considered a science fiction movie.
Absolutely.
And it was it is one of the first movies ever made, and so I was thinking, I'm not specialist in cinema. Everything is new for me. I'm like making notes, and I cannot also stop thinking now that we were talking this idea of the a future of the 90s, that the films in the 90s, at least the most popular, or at least the most popular in Brazil, let's say like this, maybe it was not so popular in Japan or in Germany, were RoboCop, The Terminator, this idea of anthropomorphic robots using for security or stuff. And then in 2010 we have Her, we have all the movies, and we didn't think that in the past, this kind of assistants, they were only feasible in, or we could only concept them in for example, 2001, Space Odyssey. So why would I have a hall in my home? Nobody thought they would have Alexa in their home. At the same time, the idea of home was like the Jetsons. That was like a robot doing more anthropomorphic, looking like a robot. I don't know. I'm thinking about this, how also our idea of what we see as technology changed, and it's funny that we have. I don't want to compare this, and because it will sound really superficial, but when I think about the development of AI, I think more in China today than in Japan, for example. I wouldn't say this 10 years ago. And in China, the face recognition, the idea of that you go to the shops and don't have to pay because you have the I forgot the name of the app, but everybody has it. So it's your virtual identity, everything together. So I think there is also, it's a change that might be reflected in these movies too. And not only movies, but in all science fiction production. Am I say something too wrong or too, or what do you think?
No, absolutely not. I think you see that a lot in the series Black Mirror, which reflects kind of all these modern technological trends which have effects on society. Because, you know, in these films with those humanoid robots or androids, I mean, there is still a lot right now. I think this was not a trend of the 80s or even 90s. You know, we have Ex Machina, we have like the new Blade Runner, we have the new Terminator, we have all kinds of humanoid machines. But there is also this, you know, kind of reflection about surveillance or what happens to our data. But still, what I think, and this is also kind of, I mean, it's not really problematic, but I think we shouldn't do, you know, the category error that science fiction is really about tech. I mean, there are some people saying that, yeah, and in science fiction, you know, all of our fears are reflected towards concerning technology. And I guess it is the other way around, because like authors or script writers, directors, they want to tell a dramatic story, and then AI is the perfect tool. You know, it's not like I wanna kind of tell a story about AI and now it's going to be dystopian. I think it's really the other way around. And because of that, we have very often this conflict against humans, this conflict of humans against machines, or humans against a powerful AI system, because then you have an antagonist, you have an all-powerful antagonist, and you as the audience, you understand the conflict. But this is not the real conflict we have in society. We don't have a conflict humans against machines, because behind algorithms, AI machines, they are again human interests. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Facebook algorithm is not, you know, a bad, evil machine we need to fight. It's the profit interest of Facebook to have an algorithm who polarizes that people stay on the website. You know, and in this way, science fiction again is a metaphor. For example, if we have an uprising of robots because they are used as labor slaves, this is a metaphor for real people working under conditions like slaves. This is a critique on capitalism or a critique on the neoliberal system. Whereas when I criticize real technology, it's always about conflicts in our society between interest groups, between like the society and corporations or the public authorities, or there is not this thing, human against machine. And, you know, this is kind of a misinterpretation, and it facilitates things. Actually, it distorts our real challenges regarding AI, and it also impoverishes science fiction, because then you have only the interpretation like it was real technology. And yeah, I think these two ways of interpretation should really be separated.
What do you think it would be our really, actually this question is for both, but what are really challenges with the AI, are really real issues with AI in this manner that we are not being able to see? Whoever wants to start this difficult question that we didn't talk about it before.
Well, I think that as Isabella was saying, sometimes we overemphasize the idea of these implausible AIs and humanoids, robots taking over the world. So I think that we end up overshadowing real issues we are facing today. And well, like it is true that robots directly replace human work positions, but this is something that we have been facing since the Industrial Revolution. So today we must discuss other more real and unpredictable risks that sometimes do not appear in fictional narratives, such as the biases. So we are facing biases ingrained in AI databases that end up profiling people wrongly, for example. And this is a real issue between people and machines that hit us at the heart of what we believe as an equal and free society should be. So be sure that any fiction could foresee this kind of consequence, like the bias in databases. So in that sense, the fictional narratives are a bit fragile, because it is hard to foresee all the outcomes and risks and scenarios that an AI may create, like biases. And I think that maybe this is the point that we should discuss. I don't know if I go further, but biases is definitely something that we are living today, and is a kind of risk that fictional narratives could not foresee.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Thanks for bringing that up. Data bias is really one of the key risks and challenges. And what I would like to say also, it's connected to biases. What worries me is if public authorities use algorithmic systems, because they claim, it to be more neutral, because actually humans are biased, and then we have technology which is not biased or neutral. And there are a lot of examples from the US when it comes to that, that offenders are kind of scored due to algorithmic systems if they need to remain or get out of jail, or teachers or whatever. But there are also examples in Europe. We like to tend to look over the Atlantic and say, oh, in the US it's so bad, but there are really many examples also in Europe where public authorities use algorithmic systems. And I think this is problematic for several reasons. So first, I don't think that a democracy is only about elections. I think democracy is also about protecting minorities and also to develop visions for the future. And of course, you shouldn't waste public money. So public money should be spend as efficient as possible, and this is also a reason for using algorithmic systems, because they are cheaper, they are neutral, they are fair, so it's all better. But what the problem is, that these systems rely, again, the data bias, on data from the past. And so I'm not really building up a vision for the future, but I'm kind of living in the past. So, I mean, for example, there was last year, there were these fuck the algorithm revolts. Yeah, it was not really revolts, demonstration in the UK, because they couldn't do, the schools, the students couldn't do their final exams because of the Corona pandemic. So there was an official algorithm kind of generating the grade, the exams, so that the students have a final grade and could go to university or not. And this final grade was based on certain data, like, for example, how the school performed in the past, how the class performed in the past, and so forth and so on. So the point was that students from kind of a school which performed weakly because there was not a lot of money, they are in a neighborhood which is not good, they obtained not so good grades. It was not their personal performance, it was just in relation to the past, to other schools. And of course, elite schools, because they have a lot of money, they're in a good neighborhood and so forth and so on. So the students there received really good grades. And this cannot be the vision of the future, I guess, for a state, because in fact, if I have an algorithm like that, and it shows me, oh my God, okay, based on the past data, past performances, whatever the data points are, based on that data, this school performs really weakly and the students perform weakly, I'd say, they need kind of extra support and not less. And this is always the point, if you have also, social benefits or whatever, and you calculate that with algorithms based on past data, the ones who are already weak, they again get less money, or they are kind of castigated, for just being poor. And again, the point, so I can use those systems and see as a democracy, okay, there are weak points, I need to support those people more and not less. And this is also a point that worries me, because the excuse or the legitimation is so easy, because you just say, you know, it's fair, it's neutral, it's a machine, it's cheaper. Why not just cannot do it like that? Yeah, so I guess we really need good standards and ethics and regulations for that.
Just to mention this, I didn't mention this in the beginning of the episode. This is one of 2 episodes about artificial intelligence. So the idea was, in this episode, we do a more broader thinking about AI. In the next episode, we're still confirming the guests, but we will have a discussion about usage of AI in governments, and the bias question will come up really strong. So this is not a hole that we left in blank, but it's the idea was to talk a little bit about.
No, absolutely. But these are, you know, the kind of topics science fiction does not really tackle that much. So
yeah, and I have a last question really quickly, because our time is about to be up. In many movies, the threat of artificial intelligence is intensifying, but a kind of a vulnerability to which the characters are exposed. So there is this classical scene of how in 2001, in which Dave wants to shut down the machine, and then the machine has the control of the room, and he said, I'm sorry, Dave, this mission is too much important for me to let you. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, no, you cannot come up. I saw you were talking with the other guy. I didn't hear it, but I read your lips. So in this case, they were like totally depending of this, of the machine to be even able to shut it down. And I think this is a beautiful metaphor, to be honest. And let me think, if we are taking the necessary measures to not make ourselves too vulnerable. This is a little bit what we have been talking about bias, but I'm also thinking here about profit-oriented algorithms, not only decision-making algorithms. I'm thinking also in this other sense. Are we making ourselves too much vulnerable to biases or mistakes that the machines could make? Whoever feel like answer this before. You choose.
I mean, just a quick comment on that. I guess probably yes, because we freely giving away our data. And people always say like, I don't care because I have nothing to hide. Yeah, I mean, it's not about, you know, what you're, I don't know, doing secretly in your bedroom or whatsoever. It is about things that influence how are you treated, for example, by public services, or I don't know, if you use a Mac or another computer, you get different prices for goods or things like that. So I think we shouldn't be more private with our data.
Well, yeah, maybe I think that we have some paths here, like this scene that you brought, Jessica, that Hall was commenting the spaceship. They were completely vulnerable, but they could stop it. So I believe we can stop AI when we are in an extreme situation. And the point is, I think that this scene shows more than the vulnerability. What this scene is showing to us, it's about trust. So like, some trust is something that we have to develop when it comes to AI systems. And this example of how is very good. And trust is always the opposite of risk. So when we trust something, we must be aware of risks and be cautious for mitigating these risks when possible. So trust and risk always involve probability. nothing is 100% predictable. So it is impossible not to be vulnerable to AI systems. So once we decide to transfer some decisions to AI, this example that Isabella said about Compass, the AI system used by the American judiciary that helps to profile offenders for alternative sanctions. Here, the judge is partially transferring his decisions to free or to keep someone in prison. So he's transferring his decision to an AI system. And in that case, the offender is completely vulnerable to an AI system, right? So what can we do when we face this kind of situation? We can blindly trust AI systems like it happened with Hall, and what seems very fictional to me. So this idea that AI is commanding everything and the astronauts were completely vulnerable up to the point something goes wrong and they need just to destroy an AI system is something that does not happen in reality. Or we can inspect these AI systems to understand if what they are doing are the correct decisions, and we can try to fix some errors or bias. And that's why it emerged this sub area of AI called explainable AI. But I would say that explainable AI tries to understand and mitigate risks and to put we in a more not vulnerable position, but we do not assure that we really understand what machines are doing. And we do not assure that we will avoid some error. So we can explain what they are doing sometimes through explainable AI, because explainable AI, it's a kind of translation of the decisions dimension of a machine, which is very complex, into something much more simplest that we can understand and access. But we cannot guarantee some biases or errors, because most of the times the biases are social biases. So the databases are, the data sets are reflecting what is happening in society. So it's a kind of bias augmentation. It's what AI does, it augments. So Isabella is right when she says that I think that the only way to avoid this vulnerability is trying to regulate when it's possible and when it's necessary. So we can decide not to use AI systems in the decision-making situation or in occasion where human lives are involved. And I think that this is the only way to definitely prevent this kind of vulnerability, because there are very, very difficult technical challenges to correct this kind of things. And some things we will not correct. We must just trust, and that's it. And I believe that society adapts to technology and shapes technology too. Like I don't believe that we are completely vulnerable, that we don't have agency when dealing with AI. So when it comes a new technology like electricity, a side product of this is to be electrocuted. It's a possible risk, it's a possible harm. But then again, society comes with circuit breakers and they just mitigate this kind of risk. So there is this technological cycle where humans are adapting technology and technology is accepted and adapted by humans. So I think that's this first vulnerability always happens when a new technology is launched, but little by little, we try to prevent, mitigate the risks, create new technologies. So when internet came, we had these spams and viruses, and then we created anti-spams. And now we have a new harm like fake news, and we are trying to deal with that. So I don't know, I believe in human agency, like we are not completely vulnerable or we can do anything. It's just this technological cycle of adaptability that we are facing, so we can go on and mitigate risks in the future.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up. This was a really interesting talk, I must say. It was really interesting to go a little bit beyond the public administration and talk about even Astro Boy. I know Astro Boy, I didn't know the story. So and also about how can we think and what belongs to the fiction and what belongs to the reality. So I want to thank you both, Isabella and Veridiana, for being with us today and for participating in this really, really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and congrats for your project. It's very interesting.
Well, and I would like to thank you all who is watching us or hearing us today. Data Talks is a series of talks between experts from Brazil and Germany who discuss the use of public data in today's society. The Data Talks is an initiative from myself, Jessica Vogt, as a part of the German Chancellor Fellowship from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and it's hosted and supported by the Brazil Center of the University of Münster in the framework of the Strategic Partnership Project VVU.USP, funded by the DAAD. I will see you in the next talk. Have a nice week, happy holidays, and a happy new year. Goodbye.